Hello! This is the second of two videos about evidence-based practice and advocacy for teacher librarians. To illustrate the ways that formal research contributes to evidence-based practice, this presentation gives an overview of the recent Gold Coast study that I conducted that explored the contribution of school libraries and teacher librarians to student literacy development through the eyes of 27 school principals. Considerable research about the impacts of TLs in school libraries has been conducted internationally, but Australian research in this area is still quite limited. Over 20 studies conducted in the US, Canada and Britain provide compelling evidence of school libraries' positive impacts on student literacy, reading and learning outcomes. The findings of these studies are summarised in an article that I wrote, which you'll find in the bibliography at the end of this presentation. Taken together, the findings of all these studies indicate that the following factors all have a positive influence on student achievement: higher levels of full-time equivalent library staffing, presence of a qualified teacher librarian, higher library budgets, larger library collections with newer resources and varied formats, networked online resources made accessible via computers in the library as well as in the classrooms, labs and offices, and high levels of student use of the library in terms of library visits and circulation. Importantly, throughout this research, there's recurring evidence that a larger full-time equivalent library staff is often related to student achievement. And I know that none of these things will be surprising to you, but the point is that this is empirical evidence with which we can underpin our arguments. I think most significantly, there's generally greater impact on literacy and learning outcomes when the library staff includes a qualified teacher librarian. For example, the influential Colorado researchers Lance and Hofshire concluded that regardless of how rich or poor a community is, students tend to perform better on reading tests where and when their library programs are in the hands of endorsed librarians, in other words, qualified teacher librarians. In addition, they demonstrated that students tend to excel at schools where library programs gain or maintain an endorsed librarian when the general school budget gets tight. So this would seem to suggest that the TL is really very good value for money. So another important bargaining point for us, I think. Aiming to partially address the limited Australian research, I've recently conducted a study about school libraries, teacher librarians and the contribution of student literacy development in Gold Coast schools. This research arose from a partnership between School Library Association of Queensland and QUT, and I think it's commendable that SLAC actually funded the research. To gather data for this study, I sent a survey to all 97 school principals in the Gold Coast area, and of these 27 responded. They came from a range of government and non-government schools, primary, secondary and combined P-12, so it was quite a good representative sample across the area. Of these 6 schools, 21 had a qualified teacher librarian. 6 had no teacher librarian, and these, tellingly, were all government schools. I realise that 27 principals is a relatively small sample, and so we cannot claim the findings to be generalisable. But they are broadly consistent with the international research, and the findings do provide authentic snapshots of contemporary school libraries and TLs in Australia. And also they provide rare insights about how principals perceive school libraries and TLs. The following overview of the study outlines the different kinds of evidence gained in terms of statistics and individual perceptions. It also shows the ways that this kind of evidence can be used to build the argument to support the essential contribution of TLs in school libraries to literacy and learning outcomes. This diagram comes from the Gold Coast study, and it indicates what we already know, that TLs are incredibly committed and busy people who often provide a wide range of reading promotion and literacy development activities. But to make a strong case for increased funding or more TL hours, we need to use statistics like these as evidence to build a convincing argument, just like a lawyer. The statistics in this diagram become meaningful when we consider them in conjunction with other evidence. So data from the survey of Gold Coast principals show that school libraries with a teacher librarian generally provide more activities, and the 6 school libraries with no teacher librarian provide the least number of activities. In other words, 4 or fewer activities. We now have the basis for a convincing argument that a TL is indispensable if a school is serious about raising literacy levels in line with government goals. And you can use this evidence also to provoke thinking about things like who else on the school staff will take responsibility for these specialist literacy activities and reading promotion if there's no TL. Now, I'm no fan of NAPLAN, but I am aware that numbers are generally valued by leaders and policymakers. So to gain their attention, it is important to speak the language and use the measures that are administratively meaningful to them. So the findings on the screen become quite powerful in the context of the Australian government's push to raise Australia's international literacy ranking in light of declining PISA scores. Put simply, for the Gold Coast schools in this study, there is an apparent relationship between a lower student to EFT library staff ratio and a higher than national mean score for NAPLAN reading and writing. In other words, a greater number of library staff seem to contribute to better literacy outcomes. This is even more pronounced for schools with a teacher librarian, and the effect is strongest for reading, but it's still significant for writing. Significantly, non-government schools in this sample generally perform better than government schools. And of course it's important to note here that the non-government schools tended to have more library staff and TLs than the government schools. The schools with a qualified teacher librarian, 50% had NAPLAN scores higher than the national mean for reading and writing for the corresponding year group. And at schools without a qualified teacher librarian, school NAPLAN scores were consistently below national mean for reading and writing. And we could use these stats alone to present a strong case. However, we could further strengthen the case with qualitative evidence, such as the principal's comments. This kind of qualitative evidence is particularly helpful for illustrating real-life implications of statistical data, as the following examples show. It's heartening that the Gold Coast principals had generally positive and well-informed perceptions of TLs, for example, as pedagogical leaders, being critical to literacy and curriculum support, as working with school leadership and curriculum team, and creating a conducive learning environment. And I think these principals' views speak more loudly than any claims we can make about ourselves. On a more salutary note, one principal related the declining growth in average NAPLAN reading scores at his school to the loss of their qualified teacher librarian some years previous. Unfortunately, the principal only came to recognise the value of a TL when the school no longer had one. However, through this experience, the principal came to see that reappointment of a teacher librarian was necessary to achieve the school's literacy goals. And of course that's music to our ears. But the true value of the quote is that it's not just a TL's perception of their own value, but the well-grounded view of the principal, someone with the administrative and financial power to potentially affect the provision and staffing of the school's library. For other principals, this argument in favour of employing a TL may gain credibility since it reflects the experience of a professional peer of another principal. As you'll see from this slide, the great majority of the principals considered that a school library is necessary or essential to support literacy development. They also considered that their school library has an influence or a great influence on students' literacy development. So, what are the implications of the Gold Coast Study's findings? And what can we do with all this evidence? Taking together the findings of the Gold Coast Study and other Australian and international research and government policies such as the Melbourne Declaration, we can develop an argument that school libraries and teacher librarians bring threefold value to their school communities. Probably you can think of other things as well. So firstly, in terms of educational outcomes, school libraries and teacher librarians contribute to national educational priorities for raising literacy standards. Second, we can argue that school libraries and teacher librarians are important to equity in schools across Australia. The school library is one of the few places in a school open inclusively to all students, teachers and parents. For students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, the library and the TL in particular can help bridge various divides, including literacy. And thirdly, in economic terms, by employing one teacher librarian, a school effectively gains two specialists who can equitably respond to diverse learners' needs and the affordances of evolving technology. With dual qualifications as teachers and information professionals, and with a bird's eye view across the curriculum, teacher librarians provide expert support in implementing the Australian curriculum. However, this study also highlights two significant needs. For more extensive Australian research about the impacts of school libraries and TLs to support informed policy making and strategic management of Australian schools. And secondly, there's a need for adequate and consistent resourcing to ensure school libraries and TLs can achieve their full potential in supporting students' literacy and learning. To conclude the argument, we can draw upon the views of two Gold Coast principles. A state school principle points to the need to fund professional TL education using these words: if the government truly values school libraries, they need to fund specialised staff to complete training. An independent Peter 12 principle is emphatic that a well-resourced library and a good TL are essential to a whole of school approach to literacy development. This qualitative evidence provides a resounding endorsement of TL value. Remember that the principals in this study responded voluntarily and anonymously to the survey, which adds to the trustworthiness and potential impact of the evidence. Finally, evidence-based practitioners and researchers need to disseminate their findings as widely as possible. So it's important to consider, who do we flip our evidence to? This would probably include students, teaching colleagues, school admin, parents, your employing authority, and government departments. And how can we extend its impact? Some of the ways include presenting at conferences and contributing to professional development programs, through advocacy, through professional associations and unions, across not just TL fields but also across education more widely. We can write journal articles and provide feeds to news media. We can be posting to blogs, Facebook groups, etc. And of course, close to my heart, we can undertake further study, including research. Evidence gains weight and momentum when shared through professional, academic and personal community, within and beyond TL domains. So over to you. Thanks for listening, and you'll find that the last slide includes a brief bibliography with references to the various works that I've referred to during this presentation.